US President Donald Trump announces tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China. How will they impact the global economy? Hello, I'm Anand Naidoo, and this is The Heat. The trade barriers will be going up on Tuesday, according to US President Donald Trump. That's when tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada will increase, and Washington will also add an additional 10% tax on Chinese products. Beijing says it will take countermeasures if the tariffs go through. We begin with this report from Sun Yi.
China has again expressed strong opposition to the U.S. decision to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods on the grounds of fentanyl-related issues. A spokesperson from the Chinese Ministry of Commerce said Friday that if the U.S. persists, China will take all necessary countermeasures to protect China's legitimate rights and interests, adding that such tariffs violate WTO rules and that imposing them are outright blame shifting and not helpful to resolving the U.S. own problems. Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Liang further pointed out Friday that China has one of the strictest and most thorough drug control policies in the world, and that it has been supporting the U.S. in addressing the fentanyl issues out of humanitarian spirit.
China has provided support to the U.S. in addressing the fentanyl issue, conducted extensive and in-depth drug control cooperation with the U.S., and achieved significant results, for which people from various sectors in the U.S. have repeatedly expressed gratitude to China. If the U.S. continues to use the fentanyl issue to apply pressure, extort, coerce, and threaten, it will only be counterproductive and disrupt the dialogue and cooperation between China and the U.S. in the field of drug control.
China has repeatedly urged the U.S. to rethink its tariff policies. Chinese Minister of Commerce Wang Wentao had said in a letter to the U.S. Trade Representative that it is natural for China and the United States to have differences in trade and economic affairs. The two should be addressing their respective concerns through dialogue and consultations. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
It's time to bring in our guests from Beijing. Qiang is Assistant Director of the International Monetary Institute. From Portland, Liang is Chair Professor in Economics at Willamette University, and Nicholas Economides is Professor of Economics at New York University. He joins us from New York. Welcome to all of you. Qiang, let me start with you. So President Trump wants to impose additional tariffs on China, 10% more. If we look at this relationship, these two countries represent the biggest trade partnership in the world. We've often heard that this is the most important economic relationship in the world. Now, China has said that it will retaliate. What are the kinds of options that is China looking at?
Well, China's always tried to, looking up to the standard that's been imposed by America. They call it reciprocal, right? So when America tried to, impose another 10% of the tariff on China, I think this kind of retaliation is a must. Look, we have already seen this before, back in 2018, actually, when Trump was not very long ago elected in the first, administration. We have already seen this, that China has been retaliating on Americans' import on like the agricultural products, the high-tech products, as well as for the some kinds of the mechanics. So actually, that caused a very, very large of the difficulties on many of the voters for Trump. Actually, for example, the soybean farmers, and that caused such a very large backfire on Trump's administration. So I think this is something to start with, and I think we have to look into a longer influences on this kind of extra tariff. That is the longer lasting, lingering inflations to come after that. Let me remind a little bit of anecdote. That is back in the 1970s to 1980 1982. This 12 years long-lasting inflation period of time. When you see the inflation probably is kind of tamed, and then the inflation is just to come back, just once and once again. So I think one of the most important reasons, besides the domestic reasons and economic structures, and if you take a look at the economic backdrop internationally at that time, you will find out America is trying to boycott another, very important trade partners, that is the Eastern camp in the whole world, and also the Middle East countries try to boycott America as well. So I think the major disruption in the international supply chain actually caused this long-lasting inflations. And when we're talking about that, we need to see that the Eastern camp and the Western camp back at that time do not have a very close partnership. But right now, if I take a look at China and America, like you just mentioned, is probably representing the most, closely intertwined and important in partnership in trade in the whole history. So actually, we're going to see more of the severe consequences after those tariffs. And China is going to have more of the things to come by. After this retaliation to begin with. So I think next time we're going to see more of the product and services from America, for example, like finance, like the medicines, like the other high-tech products that has been, be retaliated by Chinese imports.
Right, Liang, so we have the United States president saying that he wants to impose another 10% tariff on China. He also wants to impose tariffs on neighboring states, on Mexico, on Canada as well as European countries. I mean, there's so many countries around the world right now who are still trying to recover from COVID, who are still having to contend with high inflation rates. So if this tariff war continues, what impact is it going to have on the global economy?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think, obviously, tariff war, it's going to produce lose-lose situations. What that means is it's going to hurt those countries that are imposed these tariffs. So for Canada and Mexico, they're exporting to the United States account for about 70% and 80% respectively of their total exports. And for European economies, their economies are already struggling. They're so dependent on trade. 20% of their exports go to the United States. So these countries will be harmed by these kinds of tariff war. But of course, the United States is not going to be immune from this. So definitely the U.S. is going to suffer by this tariff, because tariff is, after all, paid by the U.S. consumers by and large. So what that means is that this is going to affect the U.S. production, because the global supply chain is so intertwined, especially when you think about the three countries that are levying tariffs now on. They account for about 40% of the U.S. trade. So a lot of the goods and services that cross the border are now going to be imposed this extra tax. That is going to disrupt the U.S.'s production. And of course, the consumers are going to suffer from this. The PIIE has done many of the calculations, and just by imposing tariffs on these three countries, that would force American households to pay extra $1,200 per year. And so there will be a lot of harm, I think, also inflicted on the U.S. economy. And of course, if this tariff war really triggered the tit for tat and escalation, we can easily go back to the 1930s when we had this tariff war, with the Hart-Hawley sort of act, and that really will going to hurt the U.S. Will hurt the global economy. I think the WTO General Director has sounded a very stern warning to say that if we do see this worldwide tariff war, we're likely to see double digits decline in the global GDP. So I think, again, this is really a very dangerous, I would say, an act on the part of Donald Trump, with no really clear end game in sight.
One other point, very quickly, Liang, and that is there a risk that we could see the volume of trade between the United States and China shrink?
Well, I think when it comes to the direct bilateral trade, we're already seeing that China has reduced the reliance on the U.S.'s markets, right? China's exports, you go to the United States, used to be about 19% of its total exports. Now it's down to 14.6%. But that said, I think there are many reasons that U.S. is going to continue to rely on imports, right? Given its dollar status and also given its internal imbalances. So what happened is that the U.S. will not be able to really cut off trade with the rest of the world, but it will through more sort of indirect ways, through some of the diversions of tariffs, of trade. So China may export more, to other countries, say Vietnam or Mexico in that case, and some of these products will find their way back to the U.S. markets anyway.
Nicholas, as Liang pointed out, it's ultimately consumers who are going to be paying for these tariffs in increased prices. President Trump doesn't believe that, though. He's been telling Americans for a very long time that it's the targeted countries that are going to be paying for them. I have a question for you, but before we get to that, I want to play you this short report from our reporter, Owen Fairclough, on who ultimately foots this bill. Let's watch.
Few leaders extol tariffs like Donald Trump.
The most beautiful word in the dictionary to me is tariff.
His claims that hitting imports with duties in part to protect American products and jobs helped propel Trump into the White House for a second time, and now a second trade war.
We've been taken advantage of as a country for a long period of time. We've been tariffed.
Hitting his most important trade partners with duties and even piling them on top of existing ones in the case of China.
I think you're going to see something that's going to be amazing.
But if Trump's cabinet and voters think so, many experts point to tariffs Trump imposed during his first term, contributing to the COVID-19 supply chain crisis and then inflation. And there's growing concern consumers will also pay the price this time around. Hundreds, if not more than $1,000 a year, according to multiple studies.
It would be passed on by the people who sell the goods to the people who end up buying it. So American consumers and businesses would end up paying more for the things that they buy.
Trump is using tariffs partly to reduce the U.S. trade deficit. That's when a country imports more than it exports. But China's Commerce Ministry has questioned Trump's proposal to impose tariffs on global copper imports, given the U.S. runs a surplus. That's exporting more copper than it imports. In fact, China is a net importer of refined copper and only exports a small amount of copper products. This allegation that China uses government subsidies and excess capacity to destroy competition is completely groundless. Even so, at least one U.S. steel producer says protectionist tariffs on cheaper imports helped it add 100 jobs. And yet duties are also an incentive for U.S. trade partners to develop other relationships.
India is a like-minded friend.
The European Union and India on Friday agreeing to finalise a free trade deal by the end of the year. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Right, Nicholas, so there we heard from our reporter there that it's American consumers who will pay for these tariffs. There was the Democrat Senator Ron Wyden who put it this way. He said Trump is driving the U.S. economy straight into a wall and expecting U.S. families to serve as human crash test dummies. So if prices go up, what kind of pressure would there be on inflation and, in consequence, on interest rates?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion that prices are going to go up because of tariffs. And I understand the political opponents of President Trump say that, but that's not necessarily true. There is another possibility, and the possibility is there that the countries affected by tariffs, Canada, Mexico, China, are going to devalue their currency. And if they devalue the currency sufficiently, then prices are not going to increase in the United States. There will be no inflation. And in fact, the tariffs will be paid by the foreign countries, the importers, rather than the exporters from to the United States. So it's not a foregone conclusion at all that there will be inflation. And I would challenge anybody who says that to look carefully at the impact of devaluation, which is definitely a strategy available to China, to Mexico, to Canada, to the European Union, and so on.
Okay, well, at this point, let's welcome William Lee to the discussion. He joins us from Nevada. William Lee is Chief Economist at the Milken Institute. Great to see you, William Lee. Well, let me get your opinion on that, on the possible strategy of devaluation by targeted countries to counter what President Trump is trying to do.
I absolutely agree with Nicholas that that is one channel to lower the effective price increases and, in fact, offset them entirely. I think a second channel that Professor Economidis didn't mention was that Donald Trump is now using tariffs to try to negotiate more foreign investments in the United States. In other words, improve the supply side so that we can start producing domestic alternatives. So there's both the demand side and the elasticities associated with that, whether people can find substitutes for these imports, but also there's a supply side. Now, the supply side response will take a little bit longer, but nevertheless, it's not a foregone conclusion that the American consumer will pay the bulk of the tariff. In fact, it is likely that because foreign exporters want to participate in the very large and valuable U.S. market, they are going to be willing to cut their prices initially just to be able to maintain their market share here in the United States.
What about the concerns, William, that have been expressed from some quarters about the fact that there could be primary raw materials that, like steel, that the United States imports in, which could then impact manufacturing in the U.S.?
Again, that same argument holds. You can say, well, a lot of car manufacturers that rely on imported aluminum and steel for their production, and that will cause prices of cars to go up. You're right. But when prices are very high for raw materials, manufacturers also manage to find substitutes. They will use more plastics. They will use other materials to substitute for these very costly inputs. American businesses and businesses in general are very good at finding ways around obstacles. And if you put an obstacle like a high price on one commodity or a set of commodities, they'll try to find substitutes.
Qiang, China focused or refocused its economic priorities a few years ago towards growing domestic consumption, what's known as the dual circulation strategy. I mean, to what extent will that in some way offset tariffs?
Well, indeed, this I think is most important, strategy. I don't think the Chinese government to prioritize this strategy in order to just to offset the backfire of the tariff from America, but actually to develop its own economy. Look, China has 1.4 billion in population and a rising, a very large group of the middle income class of more than 400 million people. And I think with every nation, with every economy, when they try to cross the border, across the threshold of the high income nation, they have to rely on heavily of the domestic market. It's the basically short path. European Union used to do that. American, South Korea used to do that. America itself, of course, used to do that. So I think the most important thing is that how can we activate the domestic market to make the middle income classes grow bigger and rise up with their consumption power, and also try to lift up the bottom line of the low income group so that the gap in the income can minimize. I think that this is something we really need to do. And of course, by doing so, we can increase the vitality of the whole Chinese economy. And then I think with all these improvement, I think the tariff from America would not be a most important concern, for China. It's like what happening with America. I don't think America is fearing of any countries posing tariff on it. And also another extreme example is that Russia, even though right now Russia is trying to take, is basically taking about 10,000 type of sanctions and tariffs on the imports and exports from Russia. But I think Russian people is basically doing all right. We've been doing some investigation right now in the domestic market of Russia. We find out that even from Kursk to Moscow, even to the Far East state in Russia, the basic price level, inflations in Russia itself, it's okay. So people are managed to do a normal life. It's basically unimaginable if the whole thing's happening in some middle income class or some developing nations. So I think this domestic market development is really, really important. And I think this is going to be a short path in not only current few years, but also in the next 20 years to come, before China gets into the club of the high income nation.
Liang, there is also the broader question of business confidence. I mean, we've been told many, many times that the markets don't like uncertainty. They like certainty. I mean, how could these tariffs affect business confidence?
Yeah, I think that is the point. A lot of times we mostly focus on the first-hand sort of impact of tariff. But I think the secondary effect, which has to do with this policy uncertainty, is also very damaging. So, Donald Trump talked about tariff one day, and then he's going to have a pause the next day. And then again, this new idea of taxing steel, aluminum, and now copper may be on the line, and then this reciprocal tariff. So I think that just, in a way, really disrupt the business's planning going forward. Not to mention the kind of uncertainty also damaging consumer sentiments. We just got these data from the conference board. When they look at the consumer confidence in January, we've seen this 9 points decline in the consumer sentiment when it comes to the forward in terms of the prospect of the economy. And that is the single largest decline since June 2021. And you look at consumer demand in January, the adjusted by inflation, the real consumer spending has gone down by 0.5%. Again, this is the largest monthly decline since January 2021. So if all these uncertainties, in a way, cloud the businesses' decisions, consumer decisions, according to a Wells Fargo survey, half of the American consumers that they surveyed have postponed some of their major decisions, like education, like home purchases, and the retirement plans. So I think all these uncertainties are going to damaging consumers and business alike, and that would make investments and other production decisions a lot more difficult. And if I may, I also wanted to go back quickly on that currency depreciation argument. I think, for one, we cannot just take it for granted that all these countries' currency are going to depreciate. In fact, I think China has made it very clear, the PBOC, that they're going to try to uphold the yuan value and prevent the same kind of large depreciation as they did back in the 2018, the first trade war. And for two, I think if there is a currency appreciation of the dollar, this is going to reduce the U.S.'s exports. It's also going to reduce the U.S.'s exports because the foreign income effect, right? Because these foreign countries cannot sell as much to the United States, they are not going to import as much from the United States. So it could be either way, right? The US dollar could be stronger, but it could also weaker against all these other currencies. Finally, not to mention, I think this idea that protecting the US companies from these foreign competition could also, protect them in a way would allow them to charge higher prices for the domestic consumers if there's a lack of competition from abroad. So I think all of these could, again, point to this idea that we're not quite sure if that price effect is going to be significant, but it's not going to be completely negligible. And again, for what end, right?
Yeah. Let me go to Nicholas on this. Nicholas, what's your view on what Yan Liang just told us that, as you pointed out, it's not a foregone conclusion that prices are going to go up, but she points to the example in China, which is not inclined or has an appetite to depreciate its currency.
Well, I mean, I cannot speak for China, but I don't think it's weird. I don't think it's peculiar for the beginning of the negotiating process to involve the exporter saying we're not going to depreciate our currency, we're not going to devalue. But as it goes along, it might. I mean, there is the amounts we're talking about, like 10%, is not a very big amount anyway. So a 10% devaluation is not something that is earth-shaking for China. It can really happen, I believe.
William Lee, what are your thoughts on consumer confidence in the United States? I mean, we heard just a moment ago that the Conference Board Index shows that consumer confidence has dipped. What does that tell us about the mood of the U.S. consumer?
The one thing we know about these surveys is that the Conference Board and Michigan surveys are highly correlated with both the stock market and the labor markets. And what it's essentially saying is that people are worried that the stock market doesn't continue to go up as it has in the past, and that there seems to be some stalling out in the ability to find jobs, that people are finding it more difficult to find jobs now, even though the unemployment rate is at historical lows. But let's get back to the real crux of the matter, which is uncertainty. I absolutely agree. Uncertainty is the big bugaboo here. That was the biggest danger. And let's define what the uncertainty is. The uncertainty is that that people can't believe that President Trump is taking the kind of leadership he's doing relative to what President Biden has done for the last 4 years. And so what he's trying to do in the last 30 days is really define what he's going to be doing with tariffs. The tariff is a policy tool to try to get economic and non-economic objectives done. He wants to bring people to the negotiating table, whether it's bilateral or in a small group, and to reach some deals. And I think the nature of the uncertainty is something he's trying to get rid of. And he did that in his Davos speech immediately by saying, look, the U.S. is open for business with the rest of the world. We want and welcome foreign investors, including China, which he reiterated yesterday. We want Chinese investments in the United States. And if you become a partner and produce in the United States, you not only avoid tariffs, but you also get benefits of tax subsidies. But if you choose to make your stuff abroad and compete with the United States, then you will face a tariff barrier. And I think that's the nature of the kind of policies he's trying to put in place, which is to say, bring money and capital to the United States, because the United States is where you find the highest rates of return. The innovations are highest here. And he's trying to spur that kind of investment in order to fulfill the MAGA agenda, Make America Great agenda, which is maximize U.S. employment and incomes.
Right. Nicholas, we've been talking a lot about China and the United States, but let's turn to EU economies for a moment. Germany just had an election, and much of that election was fought on economic issues, and of course a lot was fought on immigration issues as well. But at the same time, you know, we have the United States, which is pushing for more defense spending among European NATO members. We also see that there are energy challenges continuing in Germany as well. So where do you see it heading?
Well, I'm afraid that the EU might be the one hurt most by the change of regime, by the fact that there are going to be tariffs. And that's because there is a weak leadership in major countries like France. And the guys who run the show in Brussels are not, I do not have a consensus on what the policy of the EU should be on a number of issues, including on tariffs. So that is kind of a, how can I put it, a requirement. Given an aggressive position by the United States, the position, for example, of tariffs, it's crucial for the EU to be able to have a strong voice. And I don't think it does have one politically. And that means that it won't be able to react sufficiently and will be, in the end, the biggest loser of all these countries, bigger than a loser than China or bigger than Mexico, bigger than Canada.
Qiang, I've just got a minute left, but I want to talk about how technology is influencing the Chinese economy. You know, at the beginning of this year, China unveiled, of course, its DeepSeek AI model, something that was produced at a fraction of the cost that Western models are produced at. I mean, to what extent is technology driving the Chinese economy?
Well, absolutely. We've been seeing many changes right now, and many sectors, not only the high-tech sectors, but many sectors, including services, finance, education, and R&D, are trying to incorporate in the DeepSeek or other AI technology into their services and their products, and it's been evolving really fast. We've been seeing the many applications are happening right now, and also in the production level in the manufacturing, we've been seeing that AI has been adopting in a very unprecedented speed into the robot, into the auto driving. So I think the efficiency has been absolutely rising up in an unprecedented speed. Actually, the Chinese government is trying to hold the horses because they don't want the auto driving and auto taxis are replacing the human drivers that fast, because they want to find a solution in the social care and healthcare, so we can smoothly transit into this AI-driven technology and society. So actually, we've been finding a very effective way to not only upgrading the efficiency quality, but also offsetting the backfire of the aging society.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.